Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on conversations I had with a few friends of the podcast about whether F1 is still worth watching and whether Red Bull can maintain their dominance. We've been trying to figure out when to release these conversations from winter break. It's been a challenge trying to determine when to share, since we all know it's been an active season already. That said, I posed two different questions to two groups of friends. One, is F1 still worth watching? And two, can Red Bull maintain their dominance? As you'll hear, Marco, Jacob, Colin, and Phil have diverse opinions. Hope you enjoy our conversations. I have two friends of the podcast, Marco and Jacob. You are friends of the podcast via John. I think what is interesting is one of you is a longtime F1 fan and the other one is a more newer fan. So I think we are keeping in with the vibe of the podcast, and you're both pilots. Because of your experience and training, you bring a lot to the table of how you view the world of F1. Outside of that, I'm going to let you share any other details that you want to bring up as to your F1 fan story as we discuss this hot topic. This season, Max and Red Bull pretty quickly had it very clearly in the bag. Is F1 still worth watching when you know that there is this driver who is doing an amazing job? This is a car that is really designed at such a level.
So full disclosure, I am a Dutch national, so that might color my my bias my opinion a little bit here towards Max Verstappen, of course. But yeah, I've been following Formula One for a long time. Even well before Max's dad started driving, I was watching Formula One already. So in this whatever 40 years or so that I've been actively watching Formula One, there's always been periods of dominance, and if that was with Ferrari and Michael Schumacher or Lewis, of course, in the recent decade, and now with Red Bull, or even Red Bull with Vettel in the first 4 years, it has always been, for me, worth watching, and it's two ways. Like, I think it's still exciting to see what's happening behind, who's coming second and or fifth or sixth and whatever. So that part is still exciting. And for some reason, I find it very exciting as well to see how far can this go, how much more records can he break. I was really sad, really disappointed when Max ended up fifth in Singapore, because it really killed the perfect season of podium place basically on everything, but winning was already not an option. But yeah, I still find that exciting. It might not be as challenging and as exciting to watch people fight over the first and second place, but as a whole, as a sport, I still enjoy watching it, even though I know up front who is going to be the strongest, and if there's no problems with the car, that person will basically win. It's still a good sport to watch.
I love that you brought up the Singapore, because I wasn't sad that day. I was actually super excited. Even though I'm a Charles Leclerc fan, I was really excited for Carlos. But I love what you just said about the watching to see how far it can go. That's almost the reverse of what I think sometimes I hear a lot of people in the F1 community saying, oh, it's a done deal. Why? It's a snooze fest. I know he's just going to run away with it. But do you think it was because you're invested in Max, or do you think it's something bigger than that's drawing you to come at it from your perspective?
No, it's certainly bigger than that, because like I said, I enjoyed, and I'm not a huge Lewis Hamilton fan, but I enjoyed his period as well. And I was just amazed, when he broke Schumacher's record because of 91 wins, which I thought was never going to be broken. Now it's at 103, Max is halfway, so we'll see. But yeah, I think that's just to be at the top for that long, to break all these records or to do these things, I find exciting and challenging. You always put the bar a little higher and see where you can get. And this is an individual sport, even though it's a team sport, but in the end, it's the individuals that achieve the results. And yeah, you can say whatever you want that Max is only winning because of his car, and so was Lewis with Mercedes. It's still it's still exciting. It's still amazing how somebody at the top of his game can be so focused and motivated and driven to keep on performing at the best of his level. So I don't get bored of dominance. I think it's quite cool.
Well, Jacob, I want to make sure you get to chime in before we go.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to arrive at the same answer, but maybe with a different perspective.
That's good.
I'm definitely a new fan. Through a series of events with the Netflix series and stuff like that is really what brought me in, so that you can see the timeline there of when I've been involved. Before that, you flip TV channels on a weekend, and every now and then I would see a race pop up. And so that was kind of in the time frame that Hamilton was winning everything and dominating the season. And it's so funny because the perspective is very different, because when I didn't know anything about it and I would flip channels and it would pop up and I'd see and I'd read the names and I didn't know anyone. And man, for years, like every time I happened to catch a race on a Sunday, that same name was always on the top. And I was like, well, that's kind of boring. I didn't know anything about it. Every time I went to the channel, it was the same thing. And it was not engaging or interesting to me. Now that there's this depth to my involvement, right? And I got into it and started looking at it, and now like there's so much context, right? And so I've watched Max with a totally new set of eyes as I watched him, march towards this goal, the first championship and everything that happened with that all the way through this year. So it's funny because a couple years ago I would not have enjoyed it, and today I very much enjoyed it, and I don't think it has detracted at all from my experience. This has been, this season has been amazing to watch. I had a great time with it. Part of it absolutely is how far can this go? How many records can he break? I'm very much an amateur fan of like sports psychology, and I grew up playing tennis. Tennis is very, very much a thinking game. Some of what I do with flying, I would classify in that category as well. I don't know that I'm always the best at the mental game, but it's fascinating to me. And I always watch, and I just can't imagine what it's like to be in Max's position and be that high on a pedestal and come up against Singapore or whatever it is, right? So from that aspect, it's just been incredible. I will say Singapore, from an entertainment perspective, I think Singapore was good for the season because it was that little shot of hope for the rest of the season, for the rest of the teams or whatever. Okay, they're not invincible. This can happen, right? And it was that twist in the story that reunites every time what if something happens? What if he doesn't, what if something goes wrong in the next one? So I think that it's unfortunate the way that it went for Max and these records that he's setting, but at the same time, it really kind of like upped the ante and made the rest of the season fascinating to be involved in.
What do you think, Marco, about what Jacob said?
Yeah, I agree. I think for the casual observer, and I guess there's maybe some cultural differences as well between Europe and the United States, because basically every league, every sport in the US, they try to even the playing ground and have everybody, every team, every player, every whatever it is, whatever sport has the same chance of winning. That's why in like the big leagues, they at the end of the season they trade and they swap, and the good players go to the bad teams and things like that, so that the next season they all equal again. If you look at IndyCar or even NASCAR, everything has to be equal, and it's not. Everything is based on the fact that you should not have a team that has more money and can develop more and go faster and win everything. If you look at the European soccer leagues, that's the complete difference, because like the powerhouses like Real Madrid or AC Milan, whatever, Manchester, that have just unlimited funds, they win and they keep on winning, and that's what the people like, and that's why they support them. And yeah, so you have your occasional underdog that can win, but in the big picture, it's always the same teams that are on the top. And so Formula One is definitely, rooted in that mindset, in that if you can produce the best car better than somebody else, then you win, and that's where or you have the better driver, then you keep on winning. Where I often have, even though I enjoy watching, NASCAR or Indy racing and stuff, I often have a feeling that it's kind of a lottery. It's like they drive for 2 hours, and then in the last lap or the last 5 minutes, they hustle everything around, and somebody comes out as a lucky winner because he just happens to be in the right place at the right time, and not really because he was the best driver or he had the best equipment. And yeah, like I said, I think that's a bit of a cultural difference, where in North America people are more geared towards that unpredictability and excited for the last part of the race. That's why every league has playoffs and stuff as well, so that it really comes down to that last game or the last couple of minutes of a game where a decision is made.
That makes a lot of sense. I really haven't thought about it and some of those differences, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I can put my finger on it, but I definitely think that it's fascinating to watch from my seat, where I'm definitely coming from a different cultural perspective, and then to go watch Formula One. That's probably why it feels so different.
I think what both of you have said is such great insights. Like, I love, Jacob, what you said about the context and how by watching Drive to Survive, which, I'm assuming you have heard how within the established F1 community, it seems that there's mixed opinions as to those who have come via the show. But I love how you took the positives of the show and it's assimilated you in, and it's given you a greater appreciation for what is now playing in front of us via the races every week that we're having on this calendar. The fact that you're even mirroring the stuff that Marco has said, who's a longtime fan. That to me is so cool, that you're joining into what I think I am always really grateful about, is that this is a sport that existed long before I was really aware of it. And there's a lot of history, a lot of tradition, and a different perspective. And I feel very glad that I get to be now a fan of that. And then Marco, what you said, I echo what Jacob said. I never thought about the way American sports versus European sports. And when you said that too, it made me think of the TV show Ted Lasso. Have you guys watched that? Totally loved that show. Jacob, have you had a chance to watch it?
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah,
I actually haven't. I mean, I've seen clips and stuff, and I understand the premise, and I haven't actually sat down and seen it.
You will love it if you can watch it, because what Marco just said about the underdog and rooting and lack of resources, all that kind of precariousness is totally highlighted, and it's from an American trying to come into the sport and understand it. I just recently watched the whole series and was super glued to it and thought, I love this. I love the way that this is talking to the humanity of us and those who, like, going even to the sports psychology that you mentioned earlier, Jacob. There's such an element inside of there. As much as we're saying all this, I love that you guys are supportive of where the F1 finds itself today, because I think one of the articles I sent you guys was about, we've been sold on the entertainment, but it is a sport. And even at Las Vegas, there was a lot of discussion about sport versus show. And I feel like you can have both. It's just about being realistic as the fan, and what they're providing to us hopefully can be a decent balance of both. Like, I don't want so much show that we lose the sport and even the other stuff, like the technology and the psychology and all those other things, which I think is what jazzes me up. But at the same token, I don't want to lose some of the show part of it, because that is what keeps us engaged. So I think what both of you have said today really hits that in a way that I'm glad we're doing this, because I don't feel like I've heard a lot of other F1 fans talk about this.
Thinking right now on the spot what you said about the show, of course, Vegas was the extreme on that part, and at first I was very skeptical, and at the day of the first practice I go like, here we go, this is going to be a disaster, and they signed up for 10 years. But then the race was very entertaining. It was kind of the same as Azerbaijan 5-6 years ago when they did that the first time. I think the very first race was boring and everybody said we don't need to go here, and after that it's been always good. So yeah, in the end, it's about the racing. So if whatever circuit produces a good race, then that's totally fine. All the stuff around it, yeah, I'm not too, I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not watching it. I did watch the whatever they called it, the opening ceremony in with all the musical acts, and yeah, I thought it was a waste of time. But and I completely agreed with Max that they kind of put up there looking like clowns, is what he used it. Yeah, I don't think Formula One should go any more that direction than than what they already are, because it's not bringing extra to the sport. I don't think it will bring in extra fans. It will probably push people away even more.
Mm-hmm. What I am with you, like, I think what Max said, and I should ask Jacob, did you hear Max's comments at the presser? Okay, good. Okay. So I thought Max highlighted it so well, of the sport versus the show. I agree. I did not disagree with Charles or Carlos either, but I thought that Max was super eloquent about what it is that draws, I think, the majority of us, and the necessity of educating people to what is happening so we can have long-term sustainability. And one of the thoughts that I had in there, it's not just about educating them so that they will keep coming. It's that right now there's so many different things that are vying for people's attention. And if we want the sport to continue to thrive, we have to be able to make the case as to why they need to give us their time. My hope is that our little world of this podcast does that in its own little unique way. And we're helping people to see that it's approachable and there's so much more depth by having voices like you. I say all that to say thank you, because hopefully this is food for thought for people who are going to be listening to this.
Been a lot of fun, I think, watching this year.
Yeah, same here. Like I've been in the States now for 4 years, but I was in Canada before, so basically away from the European Formula One circuit. So I was kind of the only one for many years that was watching or getting up at 6 a.m. on Sundays or staying up at midnight to watch the Australian race and things like that. So it's kind of fun to see now that it's growing in the US, and there's a lot more people that have opinions and that you can discuss and talk about this, which is quite fun.
You don't feel like the oddball, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
Not the only one anymore.
You've got people like Jacob and me who are now going, hey, what did you think? Messaging you. No, but apparently you guys are on the same page about Max. So we'll have to find somewhere in a future conversation where the two of you disagree to get a little bit of that. But I love this was a very kumbaya kind of moment. So that was good too.
Yeah, I had fun. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Okay, friends, before we jump to our next conversation, I wanted to do a quick ask. We need your help. To continue growing in the crowded podcasting world as an indie podcast, we need you, our friends, to make sure you are following and rating us on your favorite podcast apps, as well as listening and sharing episodes with other F1 fans. Maybe it's a friend in a different country or city who loves Formula One. Maybe it's a friend who decided to watch Drive to Survive and wants to learn more about Formula One. Maybe it's a friend who used to pay attention to Formula One but hasn't in a long time. We believe any of them will benefit from our content. Help us connect with more people. John, Dick, and I have been humbled by those of you who have found us and stayed. We know that our growth is because of you. Thank you, truly. Now let's get on to the next conversation. Well, welcome, gentlemen. I am excited for another session where we're talking to friends of the podcast and discussing various hot topics. I don't know where this episode is going to air in relation to some of the other episodes, so I'm going to make sure and introduce everybody. Jacob, you want to say hi?
How's it going?
Colin?
Hey, how's it going?
And Phil.
Good to be with you all.
Jacob, Colin, and Phil, you three are all friends of John's. All of you are pilots, and all of you love Formula One, different stories of how you've all gotten involved. Hopefully we'll be able to have those individual conversations that'll air at some point where I can get to introduce you in a deeper way to our audience. Today, what I really want to talk about is a hot topic. And specifically, we're at the end of the 2023 season. And the question I want to pose to the three of you is, what are your thoughts about Red Bull? Can they sustain their dominance in this next season. I mean, they dominated. I think there's only one other team in the history of Formula One that has dominated a season as Red Bull, which would be McLaren. And the interesting note that I had seen data-wise was the team that messed up the streak for McLaren is the same team that messed up Red Bull's, which was Ferrari.
I'll weigh in here.
Okay, Colin.
Honestly, so it brings me back to thinking about 2021 and kind of the past generation of cars, because we saw a similar thing with Mercedes, where they were quite dominant, not exactly to this level, because obviously Red Bull went almost undefeated, but there was a lot more them leading than there was for Red Bull, especially back then. And now we see the complete opposite, where it's all Red Bull. I think there's definitely a good jump for Red Bull because they were so far out and ahead of everyone else. Their R&D department has been doing magic behind the scenes. I don't know what they're doing, but it's been working. So I think they'll definitely have a leg up. I think it'll be interesting because I know some of the, especially lower tier teams, were really focusing their efforts into this next upcoming season's car development. So I think it'll be an interesting mix. I have a feeling we'll probably see some changes because I'd imagine people are starting to get the car underneath them. Like McLaren made a huge jump this season. And so looking at that, I think we'll hopefully see some change up.
Yeah, I think it's a really fun question because on one side, there's a bunch of technical stuff that I would really love to learn more about that I don't fully understand. One of the things that's been thrown around is wind tunnel time. And my understanding was after winning the season and also after the whole budget cap issue, I think both of those things have probably contributed to Red Bull having a little bit less time in the wind tunnel. On the face level, that leads me to think, okay, so their development is not going to be as good, and maybe they're going to, other teams are going to catch up to them, and they won't be able to make as many strides to keep the car competitive. But the other hand, I look at it and think, okay, Red Bull is already starting with a baseline car to start modifying for next year that was already ahead of the pack, right? So how valuable is that wind tunnel time, and how much are we really going to see the effect of something like that, which I just don't know. I am not an engineer. I have a lot of friends that are engineers, and part of me wishes that I had done that through schooling. And so, they're really using CFD and verifying all of their data and verifying their models in the wind tunnel, which happens throughout aviation. It happens throughout aerodynamics and all these things. And so I really wonder how this will play out because they've got a lot of data back that says that their CFD that they're doing is really good, because if it wasn't, then they wouldn't have been bringing updates to the car and doing all these things. I feel like, I don't know the numbers, but anecdotally, it seems like Max wasn't finishing races 35 seconds ahead of everybody like he was in the middle of the season. So I think that I feel like we saw the other cars catching up slowly throughout the year. There was a peak, right? And I should go back and look because I'd love to see that data as well, right? In what race did Max finish the farthest ahead of everyone else? So anyway, I think that people were catching up a little bit at the end of the season. I don't know that that's true or not. That's the way that I felt as a fan watching the way the races were being televised. And so I think that we're going to see Red Bull on the podium. I think that we're going to see them winning a ton. I think Max is definitely in it, but I don't think we're going to see these races that are just complete blowouts where nobody's close. I think that we're going to see a lot closer racing in the front for next year.
Well, the big change is going to be in 2026, and that's where the hope is for everybody else, because that's when we get a new set of regulations and a substantial redesign for the car, changing the technical F1 regulations, and everyone is pointing toward that. I've read recently that the governing body FAI has banned anybody from doing any design work on the new car, the 26 car, until January of 2025. So we've got another year before anybody can think about that. And that's a good thing because it forces all the other teams to try and improve what they've got now under the current regulations. And I think that we're going to see teams make significant improvements But I don't think at this point anybody is going to be able to completely redesign the car, go back to square one, and make different fundamental design decisions. It's too late for that, and I don't know what the teams can do at this point. The fact that somebody like Mercedes can't throw money at the problem is an interesting problem. In a way, what Formula One has done is they've solved one problem and created another. It was not a good situation where there was no money limit on what a team could spend on design and development, and have all the wind tunnel time that they wanted, because that was driving the lower teams out of the game. They couldn't compete with the big boys. So that was a problem they solved by limiting all that. But when you have something, I think, unexpected that happened in the current design, where Red Bull went in one direction and other people, particularly Mercedes, went in a different design direction, and Red Bull got it so right and everybody else got it so wrong, now you baked in Red Bull's advantage for 3 years. And it's not good for the sport. It's created a really sort of boring situation this year, where the question was, okay, how much is Max going to win by? And I had some interest in watching to see whether Sergio would finish down in the pack. Is it all the car, or is it the driver? And that sort of sadly became some of my interest this year watching it. Is it the car, or is it Max? Of course, it's a combination of the two, but it's created an interesting problem for fans.
Well, so I want to make just one clarification. The prohibition you were talking about testing or design is actually on aero testing. That they were very specific on that, is that you're going to be restricted on what you can carry out in your testing until 2025, not a prohibition on design or testing that you like. It's they wanted you to hold steady to the 2020, I think it's 2023 through 25 technical regs, and then implementation. It's a lot more convoluted, but I wanted to make it clear. It's not like they can't do anything, but they have to be very careful in what they can do, and it's specifically regarding aero testing.
Yeah, Sabrina, you're absolutely right on that. Yeah, and that, of course, is the big advantage that Red Bull's got baked in now, is other teams have an inability to make changes and do aero testing on them. And hopefully everybody will hear the starting gun at the same time, January 1, 2025.
My understanding, and I wish this is where we had Dick or John in the conversation, the aero aspect is technically baked in, but there is so many other elements that they can still be working on this. But one of the things I wanted to step back is, I thought was interesting what you guys were just saying. All three of you noted, and it made me think about the fact that 2025 actually is going to be a critical year for every team, because that if we do have the technical regs changing in 2026, what your wind tunnel time will look like to figure out for 2026. This is where teams can surprise us of how they'll be able to change up what has felt like it's stacked against them. So next year will be the year that they can set themselves up quite dramatically if they get it right. And that doesn't happen so frequently. So when you talk about the idea of it being baked in, a lot of these teams have shown, by I think Colin and Jacob, you both noted, that the in-season development brought them closer to Red Bull. So we should see some really aggressiveness next year in them trying to put it all out there, knowing what's sitting on the line for them in 2026 to show up as the new dominant team. And I'm really excited for McLaren, because they seem to have gotten it just in the difference of pre-summer break, post-summer break. And then Ferrari, by the end of the year, was already making a lot of adjustments, which you could see each race that they were incrementally figuring it out. Mercedes is the one that I hope they can really do the overall blank slate design, which I think in the most recent conversations, that Dick and I had about the end of the November races. Dick brought up the fact that Mercedes is going to go in this next season with a blank sheet of paper and try it again. Well, other teams are going to be incrementally making those adjustments. And I do think Mercedes has the ability, the longevity in the sport, and the team around them to be able to figure this out. One thing that I do think is also interesting, and I'll stop talking and let you guys chime in, is that we are talking about the driver and the car, but there's another key component to this, which is the team itself. And Red Bull not only has an amazing car and an amazing driver, they've also shown that their teamwork, the strategists, the mechanics, everybody, the fact that they can do those pit stops at the level that they do, and what we know is not just race day, but everything they're doing all week long, all year long, is setting themselves up for such success. I would love to see that happening like that in other teams. And McLaren, the fact that they got the shortest pit stop of the year again shows us they've got some great teamwork. So I wonder what you guys think about that.
Well, I think the top 5 teams are all pretty compatible, pretty comparable in terms of being able to handle the organization that supports the drivers. Certainly Mercedes is. And I think Ferrari is now. Ferrari took some hits in recent years because they had some bad management at the very top. But the guy who's running the show now, Frederick Vasseur, seems to know what he's doing, as witnessed by Ferrari's performance this year. So I think Ferrari will be okay. Mercedes will be okay. McLaren, as you mentioned, I think they'll be able to support whatever car and driver gets put on the track. The issue really is, as I see it, the car. And I don't know how much change these teams can make to the fundamental design that they started with in this current design process. I don't know if tinkering around the edges to improve is going to get a car that's good enough to beat the Red Bull. It's just a dominant machine, and it's driven, their lead car is driven by a guy who is a very, very good driver. He's at the top of his game right now. So I think that everybody will be better in 2024, but can they dethrone Red Bull? Is Red Bull going to lose more than one race in 24? We'll have to see.
I definitely think McLaren are probably going to be the best lined up behind Red Bull. I think throughout the season, I mean, they made leaps and bounds from being 1920 to winning races. And especially in the sprints, they were just dominant there. So I think they're poised pretty well for this season. I'm not so sure about Ferrari. They're kind of hit or miss right now, especially at the strategy side, and that's a big part of it. But I would love to see them do well. I'm a massive Ferrari fan, so I think that would be great, but we'll see.
I don't know. I don't know exactly where my thoughts are. Maybe it's in defining the dominance that we've seen with Red Bull. Because I guess if I had to bring this to a succinct answer, I think Red Bull is going to win the next season. I think that they're going to maintain that dominance, but I think it's going to be a lot tighter margin. I think they're going to lose more races than they lost this year. So that's I guess that's my short summed up answer for it all. It's really interesting because I think about every competitor, okay, who's going to dethrone them? And I guess maybe I take a little bit of a different, I don't think that every team is really as well matched on the back end, and that it all comes down to the car and the driver, because there was a lot of talk about Aston Martin and this year, and they came out really strong. They're one of the only teams that I noted that I can, notice on the grid that really didn't have a lot of that. I feel like they didn't have as much improvement to the end of the year. They were kind of falling off maybe compared to everyone else, and not progressing as fast. So you look at some of the things, and it's I'm regurgitating this, that Aston Martin, maybe it's been a long, they haven't put all the pieces together, all the different pieces it takes to really be a championship competitor. You look at Ferrari, and they had obviously a ton of issues with strategy and stuff like this. And you look at Mercedes, and it's they know how to win. They know how to put together a championship. They know how to do all these things, but they've really been let down by the car they have. And so everyone has one problem to fix. Red Bull has it all right now, is kind of the way I feel, right? Mercedes needs the car. Ferrari hopefully they're going to be in a really good place now that they've got some of that structure worked out with who's leading the team, with how the strategy is going. And then McLaren, I agree, is really exciting for me because I don't know. I've always been a little bit of a McLaren fan, and I feel like they've never had any of the pieces of the puzzle at the same time. And now they're starting to have a couple of them, right? I think they've got a really strong driver lineup. I think they finally have a car that they can improve on and become, they did become really competitive with that car this season. So like they've always been lacking one or two of these things, and I'm starting to see those pieces fall together. So, it's like, man, if Mercedes just gets the car, they're going to be dangerous. Man, if Ferrari just gets their strategy worked out, like their drivers are amazing, they're going to be dangerous. So they all have this one thing. Any one of them are going to be able to fix that and really be a strong contender to push the next season.
Yeah, I think that is such a good point. Like when you said I want to be succinct about it, I think you really nailed some really good concepts that I found myself nodding my head to. Max, even if he does win, it's not going to be as easy. I love that point, because I think that there were so many times after the race was over, and I said this in another conversation with Dick, I said, I would wait for Max's, oh, that was lovely. Like it was a walk in the park for him, right? And you're going, that's 2 hours of ultimate focus that you're having to do on this machinery and thinking tactically, listening to the strategy, remembering all of that. And that if the teams, as we believe they have the capacity to do, to figure it out, start to give him a run for his money, I think that's actually what he wants too. Who wants to just be winning by a mile? Nobody wants to. You want to be pushed. And I think Max is one of those people. Otherwise, he would have walked away. Like, why spend the energy and time doing what he's doing? I wonder a lot about team members of Red Bull being moved over to other teams eventually. Either they're enticed by a nicer salary, less stress, or which we know happens. We've already seen Dan Fallows leave, and how that can also help these teams catch those increments. And so I just wonder, as those teams start to think about their next 2-3 years, it'll be very interesting to me to see the brain drain that could potentially happen from Red Bull, and that starts to go through the paddock itself.
We kind of saw a little bit of that with their floor getting leaked when they had that one crash that the public actually got a look at it. Because, I mean, obviously no teams could capitalize on that since it's not just the floor that's making the difference. So I think if they can actually kind of, I don't want to say poach that brain power, but I mean, it kind of is, and be able to build on what Red Bull's done, I think it'll be a lot more even.
If anybody else doesn't have any other thoughts, we will say bye for this convo, and hopefully another conversation that we can all get together.
All right. Enjoyed it, Sabrina.
Awesome. Thanks. Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysagirlandf1.com. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.